I have reviewed hundreds of CVs. The ones that get callbacks all have one thing in common. I run a data science consultancy in Australia. We worked with banks, police, large corporates, and I can tell you exactly what kind of Python project makes a hiring manager stop scrolling. In this video, I'm giving you 5 of them. Pick one and do it in a weekend. Over my career, I've done many churn projects because this is something that applies to so many industries. Anyone with a subscription business like Netflix, Spotify, fitness apps, productivity apps, as well as insurance companies, banks, telcos. The goal is always the same: identify potential churners and stop them from leaving the business. But it's not enough to build the model and flag the customers who might churn. You need to translate that into a number. How much the business stands to lose if it does nothing. Business wants to know their impact, but they also want to know their buffer. So how much they can afford to spend on retention before it stops making any financial sense. Imagine you work for a subscription company. Your manager doesn't want to know who might churn. She wants to know how much revenue are we about to lose and which customers should retention actually call first. This reframe is the whole project. So I did exactly this for a superannuation company in Australia. The task wasn't just to list members who might leave the pension fund. It was to work out how much money each of those customers would take with them if they did. So that second number is what actually changed the retention strategy, because members with a large balance and a high churn risk got a personal financial advisor. Others got a discount or a promo, or they were invited to some special events. But without the revenue number attached, retention has no way to decide who's worth that level of effort and who is not. So you need to explain to your marketing department or retention department who is to prioritize. You can use a public telco or subscription churn dataset. I've listed a few suggestions in the description. Main thinking framework. So you should not start with a model. In data science, actually, the model is the easiest part. You need to start by asking what a false positive costs versus a false negative. If you call someone who wasn't going to leave, that's cheap. You didn't lose any money and you just asked your employees to call. That's fine. But if you miss someone who does leave, that's expensive for the business. And that decision shapes which metric you optimize for, whether you're optimizing for precision or recall. Think of it like airport security. Would you rather check more people and get a few false positives, or check fewer people and risk missing an actual threat? This is exactly the same trade-off. And we will come back to this exact idea in the fraud detection project that we will discuss later in this video. So build a simple logistic regression or random forest to begin with, then rank customers by churn probability multiplied by their monthly value. The output isn't just a percentage, it is a prioritized call list. Why this type of project gets you hired? Anyone can run .fit on a churn dataset. Not everyone connects that model output to a business decision. As data scientists, we need to build models that business can actually act on. Not something built for the sake of just building the model, but something with monetary values attached. So when you add this to your portfolio, don't just leave meaningful comments in your code. While the comments in the code are also very important, but you need to write up the framework, your approach, why you made each decision, and what you would recommend for the business as the next steps. Who should they call? What actions they should take? What is the next step after they implemented this model? Before we keep going, if you want to practice Python on a challenge built from real work, I made one, not from a Kaggle dataset. It is the actual data question that I solved at my job. The dirty, messy data that we analyzed together. It is the SQL and Python challenge, and the link is in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen. Segmentation is one of those projects that sounds simple until you actually try to do it properly at your work. So most people run k-means on whatever numeric columns they have, get 5 clusters, very typical story, and call it done. But a segment is only useful if someone in marketing can look at it and immediately know what to do with those clusters. That's the actual skill here, not the algorithm, but the naming and the reasoning behind it. So imagine you are an analyst at a retailer or a subscription business. Again, leadership wants personalized marketing, but right now everyone gets the exact same email regardless of whether they are a first-time buyer or someone who spends thousands of dollars and several months with you and have been loyal to the brand for years. Your job is to find the natural groups hiding in the customer base, so campaigns can actually speak to them differently. And because of that, the business is supposed to see better conversion, which means money. You can use a public e-commerce transaction dataset. Options are in the description. And main thinking framework, you need to calculate RFM scores, recency, frequency, monetary value, by hand in pandas before you touch a clustering algorithm. This matters more than it sounds. If you jump straight to k-means, you have no independent sense of what good segment should look like. So when the model spits out 5 clusters, you have no way for sanity check, whether it is actually found something real or just split the data into those arbitrary chunks. Doing the RFM math yourself first gives you a mental benchmark to compare the model against. The first and simplest version of clustering project is tiering. You take your RFM scores and bucket customers into something like diamond, platinum, gold customers that segmentation leadership understands because it maps into something they already think about. I'm sure you know airlines do it all the time where they split customers into platinum, gold, silver, other tiers as well. But RFM is only one lens, and in my experience, it's rarely the only one worth building. So I've seen segmentation done on behavioral type. For example, you can segment customers into a foodie, a gamer, someone who spends most of their time on social media versus someone who is mainly watching sports. Telco companies have all this data about you and they can do this type of segmentation. I also have seen it done on a household composition. Whether someone has kids or not changes what they buy and when, completely independent on how much they spend and how often they spend. The point is, spending behavior tells you one story about a customer. Interests and life stage tell you a completely different story. A strong segmentation project shows you understand there is more than one way to slice the same customer base, and that the right lens depends on what the business is trying to do with this. I can tell you that 10 years ago, marketing campaigns used to target someone who is, let's say, a 25-year-old female from a specific geographic, while with these clustering models, you can target more niche based on a behavior, purchasing history, and other information. You need to run k-means on your scaled RFM values, use the elbow method to justify your number of clusters. Don't just pick 4 because it feels tidy. And then you need to name each segment in plain English. So you don't call it cluster number 2, but you need to call it something like high value at risk of lapsing or new customer who is still exploring. So something more descriptive. This type of project proves you can take an unsupervised model and turn it into something a non-technical stakeholder can actually act on. Naming and explaining your clusters is a step almost everyone skips. And again, you can make a disclaimer at the end. The data is lacking behavioral data points. But as a next step, I would have done A, B, and C. For example, I would have done household segmentation or interest profiles if I had this data available. So you're showing your hiring managers that you've done these steps because you had this data available. But in a real work settings, you can also do the following steps. A/B testing is probably the most misused tool in data science. People run the test, see one number is bigger than the other, and then ship this change. No hypothesis, no significance check, no thought about whether the difference is real or just noise. This project is about doing it properly, and it doubles as a project that proves you actually understand statistics, not just machine learning. So for you to understand A/B testing project, let me give you an example. When I publish my videos on YouTube, there are 3 different thumbnails that go with each of those videos. YouTube runs its own A/B test to see what makes people click on the video, and that's how the winner is selected. The technique used by so many businesses, marketing campaigns, products, app features, you name it. A/B tests are everywhere, whether you like it or not. So picture this. Marketing run a campaign, version A and a version B, of an email or a landing page. The team is convinced that B won because the number looks bigger. Your job as the analyst is to check whether that difference is statistically significant or whether they are about to roll out a change based on nothing more than a random choice. I did exactly this on a public marketing dataset for my newsletter, and you can find the link in the description, where we did A/B test project. So use a public marketing campaign or website conversion dataset. Again, options are in the description. Main thinking framework: before you touch a t-test, write down your null hypothesis and your significance threshold before you look at the results. This one step stops you from reverse engineering a conclusion once you already seen the number. Because if you look at the data first and then decide what you were testing for, you're not doing statistics anymore, you're just finding a story to match what you wanted to see. And businesses often do that because they want to see a number that proves they are right, not the other way around. Run the test, report the p-value, and then translate it back into something a marketing manager can actually use. Roll it out, the feature or marketing campaign. Don't roll it out, or run it for longer because you don't have enough data yet to be sure. Either way, this is a project that proves you understand statistics, not just machine learning. A huge number of data scientist candidates can build a model, but when you ask them to explain what a p-value actually means, and they freeze and can't explain it. Forecasting is different to everything we have covered so far. Churn, segmentation, A/B testing, they are all about understanding people. While forecasting is about understanding time, trend, seasonality, and the fact that the future usually looks a lot like the past until it doesn't. Say you work for a retailer or a food business. Operations keep either running out of stock or throwing away unsold products. So your manager wants a forecast that tells them roughly how much to order next week, based on what has actually happened before. I lived this problem for years as a head of a P&A in fashion retail. Order too much stock and you need a bigger warehouse because you're running out of space, which means you need to hire more people, you also need to move to that new warehouse, and you need to have new facilities, more costs sitting on the balance sheet before even a single item sells. If you order too little, the store looks empty, which is its own kind of expensive because empty rails, they don't convert, they don't sell. It's not even fully your call. A little bit of legal talk for you. In a fashion retail with a new collection, your master agreement with the supplier usually locks you into ordering a minimum number of units, whether you want that many or actually not. So what I'm trying to explain that, for example, all Zara stores across the world must order that specific t-shirt in all sizes because it's a new collection. If you know for sure that this specific t-shirt will not find the customers in your country, that not many people will want it. So all of this can go into your forecasting model. So the forecast is not just how much we will sell, it's how much we will sell inside constraints we didn't choose. This is a version of this problem that actually shows up in a job. So I suggest you use a public retail or food sales dataset. Again, options in the description. And main thinking framework, you need to plot the raw data first and name out loud what you see, trends, seasonality, and obvious spikes or gaps before you choose a model. A forecast built without understanding the pattern in the data first is just guessing with some extra steps on top of it. If you skip straight to fit in a model, you have no way to sanity check whether its output actually make any sense. I suggest start with a simple baseline, something as basic as moving averages before you move to profit or an ARIMA model. This isn't just a teaching exercise, it's how you prove the more complex model actually earns its place. If you want more videos like this, where I show you what real data works look like, consider subscribing. This is what this channel is about. So forecasting shows a different skill than classification, because working with time as a variable handling seasonality, communicating uncertainty. Many portfolios are entirely classification projects, churn, fraud, sentiment analysis, which is also okay. But having one forecasting project on your CV signals you can do more than one type of problems. This is a project most people get wrong in the same way twice. They build a model, it comes back 99% accurate, and they think they have nailed it. Then someone asks how many actual fraud cases it caught, and the answer is basically none. This type of project exists to make sure that mistakes happen in your portfolio instead of in an interview or in the actual workplace. Imagine you're working with a bank or a fintech. Most transactions are completely normal. A tiny fraction are fraudulent or at least worth a second look at them. Your job is to build something that surfaces the handful worth investigating without burying the fraud team in false alarms they will all start ignoring at some point. Use a public credit card fraud or transactions dataset. Start by saying the class imbalance out loud. And this is the main trick about this project, as fraud is not common in real life. And you will be working with a really imbalanced dataset. If only 0.5% of transactions are fraud, a model that predicts not fraud every single time is still 99.5% accurate and completely useless. That's the trap this whole project is built to expose. This is the exact same trade-off from the Churn project. Remember we spoke about airport security example. Check too many people and you waste time and money on those false alarms, but check too few and the one that matters slips through. With fraud, the cost of missing the real thing is so much higher than the cost of a false alarm. So accuracy is a wrong number to chase from the very start. You need to use precision, recall, and a confusion matrix instead of accuracy. And try a simple isolation forest or logistic regression with class weighting. What you are really building isn't just a model, it is a case for why a fraud team should trust the thing flagging cases for them to review. This project proves the accuracy is often the wrong metric, and that the one is the most common interview questions in data science. Interviewers ask it specifically because so many candidates get it wrong on the spot. Which one of these projects are you planning to build this weekend? Drop the number in the comments because I read every single comment you leave. I hope that I managed to give you not only project ideas but also explain the business context behind it. Because AI can write a perfect code now, but we still need humans to understand what to build and why, and explain and now what to do with all these models and this knowledge. I must admit that some of these projects we worked on together in my old videos. You can check them out and then make this project truly yours. You can choose different data sets and write detailed summary for each project. Remember that code is just half of the project. So those are 5 Python projects you can build this weekend. All of them answer a real business question. All of them show a recruiter something a Kaggle tutorial cannot. The difference between a CV that gets ignored and one that gets a call is usually one good project. So go build it this weekend. And if you want to see what a full Python portfolio project looks like from start to finish, I already made that video. Click right here to watch it next. This video shows you how to take a raw dataset and build a full Python portfolio project, the kind hiring managers actually want to see.